Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today we have Jianghao Liu with us. Jianghao is a brain researcher from the Paris Brain Institute and is currently a visiting scholar at Columbia University in New York City. Liu has been working to understand the neural basis of the human visual experience. His research employs state-of-the-art techniques like ultra-high field, fMRI, and computational modeling, which has provided fascinating insights into the world of aphantasia. His recent work investigating the mind's eye and visual imagery also won the European Workshop on Cognitive Neuroscience Prize 2023. Jianghao, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Tom. Nice to meet you.
Fantastic. So, like most of our research presentations, you'll have 30 minutes to give your overview, and when I come back, we'll do a little Q&A with the audience, have a discussion about the research and what this means for aphantasia and visual imagery.
Yeah, great.
Okay, if you're ready, I will throw your slides up on the screen, and you can take it away. The floor will be yours.
Okay, I could start.
Okay, let's go.
So can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it. Looks great.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for everyone to come. So today I focus on the neural basis of the visual mental imagery and the aphantasia. So a lot of people recently we found them they don't have the conscious or voluntary mental imagery. So from these kind of questions, we scanned the aphantasic people and also typical imagers to compare the brain activations or activities to illustrate what could be the potential neural signatures of the aphantasia. When I ask you or ask many people, for example, please imagine the sand beach that you have stayed during your last holidays. A lot of people, they would say, oh, I feel the sunshine, I see the beach, I see the waves, see the sand, see people walking on the sidewalk as well. But some people they say just, oh, okay, I know the concept, and I feel like these concepts are organized, spatially exactly what I have already seen it in the real life. But I don't see or visualize the real image. I don't have this phenomenology of the visualization in my mind. So recently we termed this condition as congenital aphantasia to illustrate these kind of people who don't have the conscious or voluntary mental imagery. I really like this illustration from the Facebook. Like you feel like the concept of the sun, feel like the concept of the tree and the sand. They are very well organized, like what you are really visualizing it, but you don't have any phenomenology of it. So our journey about this aphantasia started very early. There are a lot of patient case in the neurological, neuropsychological literatures. For example, when people have brain lesion after strokes or accident, sometimes they lost or they have altered kind of cognitive experience. So most obviously, they could lose ability to recognize the people or recognize the objects. And some case in the literature, they have kind of loss of the mental imagery. So after the accident, due to these brain lesions, people could no more imagine anymore. One of the first case of this kind of syndrome comes from the Charcot case in 1983, happened in Paris in Salpêtrière Hospital, where I'm working now. There was Monsieur X, a patient who suddenly lost the visual mental imagery after that, but due to the detection technique at this age, we don't know what exactly the presence of the lesion in this patient. After that, there was a very abundant literature on the patients with the brain lesions. Like, for example, here is an architect who lost the ability to imagine due to these lesions in the left hemisphere temporal lobe. So temporal lobe is a little bit above the ear channel. If you look at these red regions, these lesions in this architecture is much more extended than other patients who preserved mental imagery. And also for this right picture in this left temporal lesions, there was another 2 patients who lost the visual mental imagery. It seems that the loss of mental imagery could happen in people with, here we call it lesion-based aphantasia, and not only as far as the congenital aphantasia, which are known very widely in the public generation. So from our study, so actually we found all these kind of lesion presented in the temporal lobes in the human brain could have 5 independent domain-specific imagery deficits. For example, comparing to the visual perception, so people could lose the ability to recognize the faces or to ability to perceive the colors or ability to recognize the letters while reading. Actually, this kind of domain specificity in perception could replicate also in the imagery. A lot of people with this kind of brain lesions could have complaints like, I lost the ability to imagine the shape of object or the color of object, or I don't remember or recall the faces of my beloved ones, or I could not imagine the words or imagine different relationships of the object in space. So all these brain lesions, actually, they are present in different brain areas, but they could impact the imagery ability differently. Especially they have different kind of hemisphere asymmetry. For example, the lesion presented almost in the left temporal areas could impact more the imagery of the words. But if the lesion present in the right hemisphere in the temporal area, it could probably impact more about the faces. Also recently, there have other reports about this psychogenic aphantasia due to the depression or depersonalization, this kind of syndrome, which could be some parallel cause to the congenital aphantasia. So following this kind of neurological patient studies, so we are wondering how could this different impact of the domains could impact the ability of the imagery and the perception in aphantasia. So for example, if I ask you to imagine a beaver and a fox to generate the mental imagery and compare which one is longer, so the overall shape is much more longer or much more round. So I would say a lot of congenital aphantasia, I ask, they would have a very quick response. They could say that the fox is overall shaped longer, even though they don't have this visual phenomenology. However, if you ask this question to these neurological patients who have brain lesions, they could not really respond to this question correctly. So this reminds us that probably congenital aphantasia have kind of different mechanisms of the problems of visualizing the objects in the mind than these real neurological patients. So here we ask different groups, like individuals with aphantasia or typical images or vivid images, to compare different visual characteristics of the visual objects. For example, here to compare the overall shape. beaver, fox, and then I say which one is longer. I press fox, and then I evaluate how vivid is my mental imagery. So, for example, 1, I don't have any mental imagery, and 4, I have very vivid mental imagery. We also compared, for example, the color of different fruits. So, which fruits, Hispanics or lettuce, have a overall darker color on the skin, or compare the shapes of the written words in these different lines. For example, export amitié in French words, which words contains at least the letters, so depass the second line towards upwards, or depass the third line downwards. So it's purely comparing or visualizing the shape of the words. And then we also ask people to compare the overall shapes of the faces, like Emmanuel Macron and François Hollande, the French presidents, which one have overall round faces. And we also ask people to compare, for example, the spatial locations of the French cities like Strasbourg or Bordeaux, which one is located more left or right of the Paris. After that, we show all the images to the participants. In this time, they evaluate the same characteristics, but in this case, they have already seen the pictures based on the visual pictures. So when we look at the imagery accuracy, we're wondering whether Aphantasia could respond these typical questions related to the imagery capacities. So very surprising if you look at the first figure, the Aphantasia, typical images, and vivid images, they all have very similar accuracy in this shape of objects. However, it seems that Aphantasia always responds a little bit slower than the other groups. And even these vivid images, they respond quicker than the typical images. So it seems this vividness of the mental imagery could help or facilitate extract the visual information to respond to these imagery-related questions. So in other categories, actually they have very similar pattern. Aphantasia could always respond to these imagery-related questions, but their response time is always a little bit slower. So what happens in the perception trial? So typically, in the literature, there is no clear report about any deficit or any altered processing in Aphantasia. So Aphantasia is perceived normally like others. So is it the case? In overall result here, while participants are evaluating the characteristics while seeing the pictures, they achieved ceiling effect also in this judgment of the visual character. But again, their response time is a little bit slower. And this is also true for all the other 4 visual domains. Actually, this is very surprising because it shows Aphantasia, even though they are doing things correctly, but it seems their process behind this perceiving or imagining is following some other kind of processing. So it's not totally like the typical images. So while we ask participants to evaluate the seen perceived pictures, we ask them to evaluate also the confidence about their response. For example, while I'm seeing the beaver and fox, so I'm very pretty sure that the fox in these pictures is much longer. So I evaluated like 1, I'm not sure about the response, and 4, I'm very pretty sure about the response. So this response of the confidence is kind of reflect of the metacognition of am I aware of the decision what I'm making. Very surprisingly, in Aphantasia, we found, especially for this faces domain, they rated a little bit less confidence score than the typical images. So I have this kind of correct response, but I'm not sure about what I have done about this response. So in this case, this behavior study shows Aphantasia, they have preserved accuracy, but the response slower in either imagery and perception can be slower. I mean, they have a lower confidence about this vision-related judgment of the characteristics. So probably this could be interpreted like I have preserved access to all this information to respond to questions, but probably these metacognitive levels are a little bit less. So when we compare this result with the literature, for example, the lesion-based patients, they could not respond to these questions. Probably this lesion have damaged their access to the visual information. There are also other kind of congenital blind patients. So they were born blind, but they could also respond to a lot of kind of imagery related questions, for example, this mental rotation. So in that case, mental imagery, it seems could be responded with other strategies. Probably this is also the case for the congenital aphantasia here. So they have perceived the real world and constructed a mental representation of the world, but they could extract visual information differently while they need this information instead of directly visualizing the information. And we also ask the ChatGPT to respond these every domain questions. Very interestingly, the ChatGPT is a kind of pure language model. They could respond to questions like the visual characteristics of the shapes, colors, faces, and even understand what is the visual distance between different French cities. So however, ChatGPT could not respond to these questions related to the overall shape of the words. So imagine that he's a language model, but he could not recognize the shapes of the words. Instead, it shows that kind of semantic meanings of the visual informations could be directly used to respond to this information without any visualization ability. So most of us could agree that ChatGPT could not imagine or at least generate this phenomenology of imagery. So the next step is to understand what's happening in the Aphantasia brain while he's trying to imagine if there are any real brain signatures of Aphantasia presented in the brain. Before doing that, actually we have to understand how the brain generates mental imagery in typical images and what would be the possible hypothesis about the deficit in Aphantasia. So typically, in the literature, so scientists think that mental imagery is kind of the process which reverse of the visual perception. For example, in the imagery, there is a prefrontal cortex who extract the stored visual information in the hippocampus, as shown in this way, and then project it in the area 3, the sensory visual areas, to generate a phenomenology or conscious of the mental imagery. So both the anatomy of the function of this primary visual cortex are related to the vividness of the imagery. However, as I showed at the beginning in these neurological patients, many cases show that the patients with the bilateral brain lesions in the early visual area, especially in this primary visual cortex, they could still generate very vivid mental imagery. So actually, this is a little bit controversial about this dominant model of imagery, because if I have lesion of the early visual area, and this early visual area is crucial to generate mental imagery, so normally I have to lose the ability of the mental imagery. So instead, if we look at the neuroimaging studies in the literatures, it seems they have a consistent point in this left hemisphere, also consistent with the location in the brain lesions who provoke the deficit of imagery in patients. So actually, we defined this node as a new hypothesis of the neural models of imagery. We call it fusiform imagery node, which located in the left hemisphere between this occipital and the temporal areas in the fusiform gyrus. So probably this fusiform imagery node, the thing, could connect to other brain areas like frontal parietal areas or the hippocampus or the anterior temporal lobe to extract visual or semantic information and generate a vivid mental imagery based on these representations. So for aphantasia, if the primary visual cortex is essential to generate mental imagery, so normally we could find this reduced activation in the V1, in the early visual cortex, primary visual cortex in aphantasia. However, if this visual mental imagery relies on this high-level visual area, especially this thing, normally we have to find this reduced activity in the thing in aphantasia. And also based on this brain lesion studies, different brain lesions could have deficit of the imagery in different domains. If you ask aphantasia to imagine different domains, normally they could also have different reduced activity specifically for the brain regions responsible for this kind of domain specificity. For example, there's face regions FFA or word regions VWFA in the high-level visual cortex while we are reading or perceiving or imagining the faces. So we scanned 10 typical images and 10 aphantasia. So we asked them to perform these 5 categories and also to perceive the same images in the scanner to compare. We also asked participants to compare the meanings of the abstract words to minimizing the visual mental imagery. So in this fMRI studies, we always compare one condition to other conditions to extract what could be the real interesting effect in the brain. For example, we compare the imagery trials to the abstract words trials. So well, in the abstract words trials, you don't have or minimized mental imagery. We could get what could be more in the imagery trials. So in this study, we compared the activation level and the representation and the functional connectivity. So representation is a multivoxel similarities. For example, you have a region activated, you have different level of activation, but in different voxels, the pattern of activations could also represent the content while you are imagining. So functional connectivity shows how different brain regions are synchronized along time while they are trying to functioning or generate mental imagery. First, if you look at the primary visual cortex in the V1, in typical images, there are foveal V1 and peripheral V1. In the foveal V1, this first column, the light colors are the imagery trials and the darker colors are the perceptual trials. So in the foveal V1, it seems that imagery inhibited the V1 response, but in the perception, they have a very high response. But peripheral V1 imagery and perception, they also generated a very high response, even for these abstract words. So what happens in aphantasia? So in aphantasia, so we didn't really find any reduced response. For example, in this peripheral one, there are also activation in the imagery trials. And in the foveal V1, the imagery trials in the aphantasia also deactivated the foveal V1. So it seems there is no real clear neural cause of this V1 activity in Aphantasia's phenomenology. Then if you look at the higher visual areas in this domain general imagery network, the thing, we identified this thing by contrast all the imagery versus the abstract words to identify the imagery specific activations. So we do find this thing activated in the typic imagers in the left temporal area. However, in Aphantasia, very surprisingly, this area is also presented in the high-level visual area and without any activation differences. Then we look at the domain preferring networks of the imagery. So here I show a representative typic imagers. If you look at this high-level visual area, temporal area, the red patches is for the imagining of the faces, and the green one is for imagining of the words. So all these domain preferring regions in the high-level visual areas are present in typic imagers while they're trying to imagine different categories. So what happens in Aphantasia? In Aphantasia, very surprisingly, we find also very similar activations. In Aphantasia, while they don't have any visual phenomenology of each category, but they do have these high-level visual activations, probably which support this kind of extraction of the visual information. This is also true for every Aphantasia we have scanned. So if you look at this individual brain, in this high-level visual area, they all have these category-specific activations presented. Then in the second level, if we compare the imagery and the perception, so imagery, it kind of engages the activations in the high-level visual areas, but not the posterior early visual areas. For example, here the faces, the purple color overlaps imagery and perception in these anterior patches. This is also true for all the other domains. So if you look at this in blue regions, activations of the imagery only activated the most anterior patches, which was engaged also in the perception. Then if we look at the representation, we show that this diagonal cases a little small squares. It shows kind of, while I'm imagining similar items in these domains, so my brain regions in this area could represent the visual information very similar to the other trials in the same category. So in the perception, the V1, the primary visual cortex, and the thing, they all present this semantic domain information in typic imagers and also in Aphantasia. And also is also the case while participants are imagining the same thing. So typically, there's no real differences between this representation level of the visual information or semantic informations in the Aphantasia. However, what is the difference? So actually, if you look at the functional connectivity, this thing, while imagining different categories, the thing will functionally connected, so synchronize with activity in the bilateral frontal parietal areas. And also it will connect with the local high-level visual area for this domain-specific information area, like FFA, VWFA. So I'm imagining the face, I will connect with the face area. While I'm imagining the words, I'm connected with the word area. So these shapes of the network could be kind of the neurosignature to generate mental imagery that needs a widespread brain areas in the different brain regions. But in Aphantasia, while we were tracking these functional connectivities of the thing, we only found very, very local functional connectivities in colors or shapes, but not the functional connectivity to the frontal parietal regions. So basically, in Aphantasia, the high-level visual areas, they do not correlate with the frontal parietal activity, either in perception or in imagery. So back to our hypothesis. Actually, the first hypothesis about primary visual cortex should be related to the imagery. It seems not correct due to this equal activation or equal activity in the aphantasia. The second hypothesis about the thing and high-level visual domain peripheral regions, probably they have reduced reactivations in the thing in aphantasia, probably is not all correct. However, this equal activation in the high-level visual areas in aphantasia, it seems correspond to our behavior results showing that a metacognitive deficit, because you have all this information presented, activated, but you don't have the access to this visual information. And also this functional connectivity could probably also related to the neurodevelopmental disorders. For example, the autism, schizophrenia, or other disorders, they have all these normal brain activations, but it seems their functional network is altered. So probably this could also be kind of evidence to support a potential neurodevelopmental cause in aphantasia. So we have compared aphantasia and the imagery, aphantasia and the typical imagery. We found aphantasia lost the functional connectivity between this high-level visual area to the frontal area. But is there any activation more in aphantasia? Because they are trying to solving the questions or problems differently. Is there any process related to that? So actually, while we are comparing to imagery during in aphantasia brain to the typical images brain, we found this abnormal activity in the right frontal parietal regions, very similar network to the ventral attention network. So we found both in imagery and perception. So you know that ventral attention network, typically you have two different functions. The first is to disrupt the ongoing process. So while you are reading and suddenly you hear a fire alarm, suddenly you have to be attracted by this external activity, which is surprising for you. So the ventral attention network, usually they cut the ongoing brain activities and to shift attention to very urgent urgent situation. And in this case, it could also inhibit the brain regions, other in brain activities related to task unrelated activities in the brain. So aphantasia, they have this abnormal ventral attention networks hyperactivity in the imagery and also in perception. Probably this kind of imagery process could be disrupted or interrupted during the generation or maintenance of the conscious mental imagery by these ventral attention networks. On the other hand, so in this 70 hyper resolution fMRI, so we've identified while people are imagining faces or colors, they have different patches. So it's not only a single region activated during imagery, but they have, for example, a posterior color region, central color region, and anterior color region activated along the ventral pathway during the visual cortex. For example, we have the face system and color system here presented in different colors along this pathway. Especially we recently, this study identified these face and color regions in the orbital frontal cortex. So orbital frontal cortex was reported to process the value, the order, or the reward-related activity. However, we find that this face and the color patches in these areas in both typical images in aphantasia. So next, we want to understand how does aphantasia impact these brain activities within the same system. So we ask Aphantasia firstly to provide any evaluations about the visual characteristics or semantic meanings of the words. For example, we ask them to organize this fruit by their visual color. And then we ask them to look at the words, but organize the visual items by the visual color. It's very similar to the typical process of imagining something. Okay, I know the color, and then I put the items with another items which are in the similar colors. And also organize the items by their names. So typically, this kind of process is kind of evaluation of the visual representation or semantic representation, how it organized or represented in the speaking images and Aphantasic's mind. Very interesting if we compare these typical images and Aphantasics. Even Aphantasia don't have many mental imagery or phenomenology. They could arrange items in a very, very similar way in a typical images. So actually this kind of arrangement task of the visual characteristics in imagery probably don't need the visual phenomenology or visualizing the items. And this is also true for the faces. So I could arrange faces without any mental imagery, but I could correctly arrange it by the visual shapes. Finally, in comparing the brain activities related to these patches, so we compared activities in 4 different dimensions. So the first domain, selectivity. If you look at the middle figure, the perception and the imagery along this ventral pathway from the posterior to anterior of the brain, they have a higher selectivity for one domain. So if you go in more forward, anterior, these brain areas was more specifically activated for only faces or for only colors. So it's kind of gradients of increasing activation, selectivity. If we look at the representation, so we compared this subjective noted evaluation of semantic and visual representation in the previous arrangement task to the activation pattern of each patch. Actually, in both Aphantasia and typical images, they have this similar increasing gradient information along these visual areas. However, the activity between this perception and the imagery is reversed during this activation level. So in the perception, you have more activation in the posterior brain, in the primary visual cortex, and less activations in the orbitofrontal cortex. But in the imagery, the orbitofrontal cortex, it seems, is initiated the imagery process. It showed higher activation than the posterior part. And also for the functional connectivity, during the perception activation, more connected from the posterior brain, but during imagery activation are more connected in the anterior brain, in the frontal cortex to the high-level visual cortex. In Aphantasia, the difference is that Aphantasia have all these similar domains selectivity of the patches, and also they all have this preserved semantic and visual information in the brain and showing very similar tendencies than typical images, but their high-level frontal areas like orbitofrontal cortex and the high-level visual cortex, it seems to have a reduced activation and reduced functional connectivity between them. So Aphantasia, it seems a deficit of these bottom-up mechanisms from this frontal cortex to the high-level visual cortex, but no clear difference in these bottom-up mechanisms. So while here we compared the imagery and perceptions, someone would argue that aphantasia is kind of deficit of the consciousness or deficit of the internally generated phenomenology. There is a hot debate related to these neural correlates of the consciousness. Well, how do we aware of the external stimulus? For example, here in another study, we found these frontal parietal networks. It could modulate with different attentional modulation, like attentional enhancement or attentional reorienting to generate access to the conscious reports. Actually, this is very similar to what we have found in the fMRI study. So either this consciousness of external reality or internally generated phenomenology, it depends all on these high-level visual areas to the frontal parietal areas. So actually, we want to ask what is the functional rule of this visual mental imagery. If aphantasia, they don't have mental imagery, however, they could still represent very similar informations, or they have very similar behaviors. Probably, they have different strategies. Typically, imagination is considered as a hybrid or transformative representation between this pure linguistic abstract representation and this sensory emotional representation. From our study, I feel that over vision, either in typical images in an aphantasia, is kind of the link between the external reality and internally phenomenology. Actually, this processing could be different, but fundamentally, overvision is kind of constructive mechanism. It's not a directly copy of the external objects. In aphantasia, probably they have a different process or different way to construct the external reality, not only probably based only on the visual characteristics. But however, while they're trying to reproduce the same, I would say, feeling or sensory stimulus while they were seeing during the imagery, they were trying to reproduce a very similar ways of the constructive mechanism. But even this constructive mechanism is not totally the same as the typical images. So as a conclusion, I would say during this journey, I am very admire of the subjective experience of each individual. So every people have their own internal mental world, and they are really perceiving the words differently, and their brain are really trying to do different strategies to adapt to the world and get the things functioning. So we started this journey by understand what the typical imagers are imagining, and then we are extend these results to understand how the patients or congenital aphantasias could know why they lost the ability of visualization or imagining. So this kind of process from the imaginable to the unimaginable actually is remained as there are a variety of the neural variations in the people. From the brain regions, from the brain works, actually suggests that this conscious experience, either perceived or imagined, is dependent on the integrated activity of the high-level visual areas and the frontal parietal networks. So all these regions, they could function properly independent, but if you want to generate a conscious experience, you need them to talk together. So there is no island in the brain. In the future, I would say aphantasia is very interesting case to probably a lot of theoretical framework in the cognitive neuroscience, and also to understand these individual differences or subjective experience is very fascinating. For example, aphantasia, they don't have the conscious or voluntary mental imagery, but a lot of them could dream very vividly. So we are working with other teams to study what could be the brain network or imaging network functioning and how it's functioning while aphantasia generate the vivid dreaming. And also this aphantasia with the question about the metacognitive deficit challenge the classic measurement of the aphantasia. For example, a lot of studies use the VVIQ questionnaire, but this VVIQ is kind of subjective report on the self-assessment. So in our behavior study, aphantasia, they do have this reduced judgment of the confidence. So this kind of metacognitive deficit, I think it also impacts the validity of the VVIQ. So is this diagnosis of the aphantasia is the true reflect of the reduced phenomenology of the internal representation, or just a reduced of the metacognitive level of the confidence? And also this aphantasia is also a very interesting case to study how it's related to the neurodevelopmental disorders as suggested by these functional connectivity disorders in the brain found in our studies, and also other psychiatric disorders. So you could find all these publications in the Twitter or Google Scholar pages. If you have any questions or any suggestions, I'm happy to collaborate or take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a really packed presentation, lots of great information in there, and we will do our best to summarize and get to some of the questions. If anyone watching live has questions or curiosities that you'd like me to ask, feel free to add them into the YouTube live chat there, and we'll be sure to get to them. There's quite a few things that we your research has covered. So to narrow in on one thing is difficult, but if I could try and summarize maybe a couple of the key takeaways, especially for the aphantasia community here that's watching and will watch the video. The idea is that we do have the same neural mechanisms that you would find in imagers, but the connectivity between these regions is reduced, which blocks our ability to experience the visualization. And your findings show that this is specifically in the attention area of the brain. What was that region called?
So they have two different ways. For example, the connectivity to the dorsofrontal parietal regions could be related to the generation or maintenance of the visual mental imagery consciously. And there was a ventral attention network. So actually, ventral attention network is not really activated in a lot of cases. So in any case, if it's activated, it seems that you have very urgent or inhibition activations or task unrelated things. So aphantasia, they have these higher activities in these areas. Probably this concurrence or competition between different frontal parietal networks could be kind of a cause for the interrupting of the maintenance of generation mental imagery in aphantasia due to this abnormal activity of ventral one. Because this ventral one, in a lot of attention studies, it could interrupt with the dorsal one to shift attention, to interrupt attention, something like that.
So with higher activity in this region, what could some potential impacts of higher activity here be? Like it sounds like more on edge, more reactive to the environment, like these kind of things.
Yeah. So in aphantasia, a lot of reports saying that they are using other strategies like labeling strategies or they're doing things differently. Okay, I imagine the sun, I feel the temperature of the sun. So even though I don't have the picture. So this kind of ventral attention network, it could interrupt the visual processing, but it also reorient the strategies. Like I could reorient my strategy to the semantic network. So we do find this higher connectivity of this ventral attention network to the typical semantic network in the aphantasia brain. So it seems that, okay, I don't have mental imagery, but if I want to solve this question, I could use my semantic knowledge. So I need this network to cut this visual processing and reorient to the semantic network to extract that strategy. I think
it's interesting. And it's interesting because I think we've seen this before, this idea that aphantasics may be just as accurate in answering questions, but speed sometimes is a little bit slower, and our confidence, like, did I actually get that right? Maybe not so confident. So this is interesting. We also got a couple of comments like this, and I've heard comments like Tom's before. Fascinating. It does feel as if I'm imagining visually, but I can't quite access it. So this kind of feeling, that's the sense that some aphantasics have, would be supported by your research.
Yeah, a very important finding in this research is all these high-level visual areas. So it's a visual areas. So probably you say, okay, it's present in semantic meanings, something like that. But it still have a lot of visual activations in the aphantasic brain while they are imagining. So it's the activation or what they are doing in the brain is not pure semantic, I think. Probably they have at least have preserved access to this information. But the real question is, how could they lost this phenomenology while still have the unconscious access probably to their imagery?
Yeah, it's very fascinating. And it's because, you know, like when I see, you know, someone I've met before, if I were to see your face again, I would recognize you. So it's your visual image is stored, obviously. Otherwise, you know, how would I recognize anybody? So this kind of shows that you know, that type of activity. Let's get to a couple of questions that we've had through the conversation here. Let's start here with Christian. Christian asks, how do these results fit together with those of Kogi and Pearson, who used binocular rivalry tasks and did not find priming effects of the visualization attempt for the aphantasics on a sensory level?
Actually, this is a very interesting and hard question. So from our point of view, so here we examine the high-level visual areas or something like that. But we, so if aphantasia is related to this low-level or primary visual cortex, these bottom-up mechanisms, actually, we should find these reduced activations in the aphantasia, but we didn't find that. So it's a very interesting case to see actually aphantasia, while they are doing this bottom-up processing, is it still different than the typical images? So from Pearson's, Professor John Pearson's study, actually aphantasia have this reduced capacity of imagining due to this low-level vision. It seems aphantasia use different kind of strategy. So I would say it's not a proper deficit of the low-level vision, but they are doing the things very differently. So if you're probing the same thing in typical images and aphantasias, while they are doing the things very differently, you will not really say aphantasia have a real deficit on it. But it's still very interesting to probe how this different strategy impacts the low-level vision. At least in our study, even for the visual perception, aphantasia have reduced the reaction time, and they have probably kind of other processing differences than typical imagery. But this processing is probably very specific to aphantasia, and we don't know about it.
And maybe the research hasn't got there yet, but do you would you hypothesize a similar situation for other mental senses? So some aphantasics say that, they don't see visual images, but others like myself, like I don't imagine smell or taste or the mind's ear. Is this a similar type of effect you think that's happening across the different senses?
Yeah, actually, this so as I have interviewed a lot of Aphantasic friends, it seems probably I understand probably in the brain they have kind of domain specific network or sensory network or more domain general attention orienting or something like that. They have two different levels. So you probably due to this of different phenomenology of the imagery, for those visual aphantasia, they have problems of connectivity between this visual sensory cortex to the associative cortex. But for other modalities, they have this modality-specific areal connectivity. But if you lost all the visual mental imagery or all types of the imagery, probably you have much more problems in the general functioning of these associative frontoparietal areas. So this could be kind of explanation of this phenomenology of association of different domains.
Yeah, because we do hear from some who say, I only have auditory, for as an example. Yeah. I have none of them except for one, or I have two or three but not the others. So yeah. This might explain that.
Yeah, I feel like so as I explained, so in typical images, so they have the thing, the high level visual areas. While you're imagining phase, the connected phase, imagining the picture of the words, they connected to words. So it's a kind of domain preferring connectivity and domain general connectivity to the frontoparietal area. So I would say, so it's just a hypothesis. I would say probably for this modality specific imagery, they also have this different connectivity difference between different levels, the domain preferring level or domain general level.
Very, very interesting. I'm going to get to a few more questions here. So Doug has a two-part question. So here, part one, I wonder what you might find if you repeated the beaver fox study, but after showing the picture of the beaver and fox, followed by a delay of like 15 seconds. So the question is, would aphantasics speed up, and would similar areas activate as those that activate during presentation of the images? So like is a delay after the stimuli going to impact speed or accuracy?
So in the behavior studies, so while we were presenting images, Aphantasia, so people have to respond as quick as possible. But in the FMI, they didn't need to do that. I'm not pretty sure if they could respond faster. Actually, the difference is not so big, actually. Yeah. It is not very critical, like 1 or 2 seconds. It's just, for example, 200 millisecond differences. So if you are asking people the same question in the real life, probably they will not notice these differences.
Okay, interesting. That's actually interesting to know here. I'm going to throw up a couple other comments. Thank you, very interesting. Appreciate the deep dive into the mechanics. The focus on network issues makes sense. Here's another question from Jeff. If an area was less activated and other areas are higher activated, was it the same common areas with higher activity or different for every patient?
Actually, it's a very interesting case to differentiate probably the subtypes of aphantasia. And also, we know that aphantasia, they have different kinds of strategies. But in our case, if you look at the figures, we compared the brain activities of each individuals. So we analyzed them brain individually. We didn't like summarizing all the brains together. If you look at the loss of the functional connectivity from this high-level visual area to the frontoparietal area, in all aphantasia, we found a very similar pattern. So in this case, this more domain general dysfunctionings could be generated to probably most of the aphantasia.
Interesting. And we've got a question here from Jenny. Do you visualize?
Yeah, I visualize a lot.
You
So I
visualize
also,
a lot.
yeah, I also like I also play Chinese traditional instrument. It's called guqin. So they are kind of feeling while you are listening or playing the music. You are visualizing the automatically associate. So I will not say I'm synesthesia, but it's kind of associate of music and mental imagery is very nature for me. So I think it's also for a lot of people it's the same.
And how did you get interested in this field of study?
Yeah, I have an engineering background. So at the beginning, I would like to work on the brain computer interface, very classic thing. So actually, one day I would say, so if you look at the film of the Matrix, what would the ultimate information about the reality or virtual reality or imagination? So we have to really understand the mental imagery, because this is the subjective experience of ourselves to trying to recreate the world. So I started from the typical images, and then I heard Aphantasia. I would say subjective experience. Okay, visual mental imagery is important, but understanding subjective experience is more important, because Aphantasia is a real showcase to us that people doing things differently, process differently in the brain, but they still have the same visual life.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. This is one of the things about aphantasia I find so fascinating is it's, I think it's common knowledge that, people say we think differently, but to actually see like such a different, phenomenological experience that's tangible and easy to wrap your head around.
Exactly.
Compared to some others. We do have a few other questions here that I'm going to throw up on the screen. Christian's got another difficult one here for you. Zhang et al. 2023 found that aphantasics have activation in the primary visual cortex, but that this activation did not match the activation observed during perception. So what do you make of these results?
Aphantasia that activation did not match the activation of something. I see. So if you look at the high-level visual area, the primary visual areas, so the activity of the primary visual cortex is still very debating about the functional rules of the visual mental imagery. There are also other studies showing the comparable decoding accuracy of the V1 for typical images and Aphantasia. So I would insist on these cases from the patient evidence. So the loss of the bilateral or bisection, the resection of the bilateral visual cortex that do not really impact the imagery capacity in the typical images. Probably, the primary visual cortex or low-level visual cortex still in the same networks than the high-level visual cortex or in the larger brain networks. So the information, while you are imagining, it could be circulated within the network, even though not every part of the network is functioning. So in this case, it's hard really to judge that the contribution of the primary visual cortex is critical to the phenomenology of the imagery. So in that paper, they concluded that the activation or the pattern of the primary visual cortex is not critical to the consciousness effect. So we have already noticed the rule of the primary visual cortex as published by Christoph Koch in many years ago. The question is the real rule of the primary visual cortex for the consciousness. So here, I think they have kind of the consensus probably that the primary visual cortex, even in imagery, is not crucial to generate the phenomenology of the imagery.
great response there. And I have just a couple of more here. I know we're just a few minutes over, so I'm going to try and get to the last few questions as quick as I can. I have another one here from Tom. As an aphantasic, I often feel that I'm thinking harder to answer these imaginary and perceptual questions. Do you think that the delay represents the brain power used? So maybe more energy being expended to try and answer some of these questions.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know that. So while I was talking with my participants, so Aphantasia participants, even though there was a couple of Aphantasia, so both are Aphantasia. Actually,
Okay.
they answer the question very, very differently. So ask them to, for example, to draw the building where they live, the facade of the building, the street scene. Even there was a guy who drew it in 3D view. I would say Aphantasia, it depends really on what kind of strategy they have developed by themselves. So they have a different efficiency of the strategy. A lot of efficiency strategy could be solve these kind of questions. So even as I mentioned, the congenital blind patients, so they didn't have any real visual experience in their life. But if you ask them to rotate mentally some geometries, they could do that. They could respond perfectly. It's real depends if the brain power, I would say, depend on the efficiency of what you have learned by yourself.
This
But
is actually
everything is possible.
this is a great answer actually, because it's this idea that like you can learn strategies to adapt and do things more efficiently,
Exactly.
you know, with effort and approach rather than something that's just kind of like inherent. Yeah, this is I love this. I've got two last questions and then I'll let you go. So first question here is from Anna. If aphantasics still have unconscious access to visual imagery, why can they not access it when performing a visual imagery task? So maybe we can summarize, you know, this thing around attention.
Yeah. So probably they have all this visual information stored in the brain. So at least you have the normal or intact visual perception. So as a word model in the mind, you could generate everything or every information while you are needed to respond to your question. So what we are insist now is how to generate the phenomenology. So you have information, but you don't have the phenomenology. Actually, there is a very interesting debate about the consciousness could be divided into the access consciousness or phenomenology consciousness. So probably this aphantasia could be a kind of showcase to say that you have access to the information, but you don't generate the phenomenology of consciousness. There was another interesting patient case. So while, if you remember this word shape, so while we were presenting the questions to patients with brain lesions who damaged the word areas, they could not really respond to the questions related to the shapes of the word. But once you allow them to trace with the finger, they could know which word is on which shapes. So in this case, the visual shape, the visual information of the shape words could extract it not only by the visual information or visual ways, it could also be extracted by the motor ways or by other many strategies. So in this case, the access consciousness could be preserved in aphantasia, but they could also use other strategy or the motor ways. For example, the eye blinking, something like that. So I have never verified it, but I suppose they could also have some other unknown strategies about aphantasia to extract this information. But what we are talking about now is this phenomenology absence related to this visual area and the frontal parietal area.
Great summary there. I'll wrap it up with this one last comment or question here from Mary, who is currently watching us on an imaginary screen in her Oculus Quest 3. So it's like a fake imagery. My daughter, an extreme hyperphantasic, does this all the time with imaginary friends. So what is the Oculus doing to my brain?
I don't know. Hard to say.
Hard to say. We don't know what the impact is, but that's a very funny thing. VR
very,
and
very
this kind of projected,
exactly.
video extends the imagery kind of in a different kind of way.
I feel, yeah. Actually, in the second part of the study, I introduced the face and color visual systems. So the visual systems in the brain. So we could generate perception, recognition, and dreaming, and hallucination, and illusion, and imagery. So all these different kind of phenomenology. So we generated based on the same system. So the visual is not really only perception. That. So I think the most fascinating study thing in this study is to really understand how the same system, the brain engages differently to produce different kind of phenomenology.
Fascinating stuff. Jianghao, thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to your future work.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for participating and the wonderful questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.